Welcome to the 12th episode of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. I'm your host, Vito Chirco, alongside my sidekick, my partner in crime. It is Doc, the Doc from Doc and Jock, John Macaroon. John, what's going on today?
Good morning, Vito. How are you?
Good, very good, and glad to join you today, this lovely morning in October, now nearing the end of October, and nearing the end of the first round of the playoffs for the AL and the National League. And the American League, 2 Game 5s are already on the docket for Wednesday. So today, as this comes out every single Wednesday, Tigers Talk with Chirco and Co. on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network and on DetroitSportsNation.com. Thanks to them as well for hosting us and each and every single one of the podcasts under the Detroit Sports Podcast Network umbrella. So Rangers at Jays, Astros at Royals. First for you, John. Rangers at Jays, Game 5, 4 o'clock today. Hamels against Stroman. Stroman's 4-0 in the regular season. Very good down the stretch for the Jays. Hamels, the ace of the Rangers pitching staff, though. Veteran, postseason proven with the Phillies and now with the Rangers. Does he get it done today for the Rangers against the Jays? What do you think, John?
You know, the game's in Texas, correct?
It is in Blue Jay land, Toronto, because of the fact that the Jays won their division. The Rangers, remember, did as well, but with less wins. So the Jays they don't have the home field. The Royals do throughout the postseason for the American League side. But the Jays are the second best record in the American League, so they have Game 5 at home.
Okay. Not having a dog in the race, watching these playoffs has been fascinating, and I'm really impressed by the fact that Toronto struggled early. That first game when David Price struggled kind of called some things into question, knowing that, wow, he's 0-6 in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And he really, I think, hurt his value going forward next year in his contract talks, knowing that, in his last game, in Game 4, he came out of the bullpen, not going to be used in Game 5. But I believe in the strategy of you have to be in Game 5, and if you have to use David Price, I agree 100%. Now looking at Game 5 at Toronto, the crowd's going to be wild. You tend to typically go with the home team, and when you have an offense like this, Tulowitzki's kind of on the rise. The offense has picked up the last couple games. It's going to be fascinating, but I'm leaning toward Toronto to advance in Game 5.
So you don't believe that the Jays, that John Gibbons, the manager of the Blue Jays, wasted David Price by pitching him in Game 4?
Obviously, if you're 0-6, and you don't need to be beat over the head with the fact that in the playoffs so far, David Price has been not as effective. So, and he pitched pretty decently.
He did. 3
around
innings, I believe.
60 pitches or so.
Yeah.
And you got, R.A. Dickey had a solid performance. You take him out. I was kind of interesting. They took him out one out short of a win. But
yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
That was kind of interesting. But
yeah,
in the end, you have to get to Game 5. And it really calls into question. Remember back in 2006 when, Jim Leyland had that decision regarding Kenny Rogers and whether to use him or not, and ended up Kenny Rogers did not get that start, and the Tigers went on to lose the World Series. But I believe, in essence, I truly believe that you have to do whatever you can in that elimination game. When you have a game where you could be out, you got to do whatever you can to advance. And if that means using your starters in the bullpen, that's what you do. And but in looking at the game, though, I really believe that Toronto's going to get to Hamel early and often, and that crowd's going to be out of control.
I think the Jays get it done at home, too, because it's a raucous crowd, isn't it, at the Rogers Center in Toronto. They haven't seen postseason baseball since the year I was born, in '93, when Joe Carter hit that home run. They won the World Series. So it's been a long, long time, 2 decades long, 2+ decades now. They want playoff baseball. They want playoff victories. And I think they'll get it in Game 5 today against the Rangers. And the Rangers in Tejas, if you played in Texas at the ballpark in Arlington, great environment as well. And they haven't seen postseason ball now since, I believe, when was it? 2012, I believe they made the wild card game and lost in that wild card playoff game. And since then, they haven't made it back to the postseason. So that tells me they want it bad, too. And if they were at home, they would have that home field advantage, Doc. But I think in Toronto, you have more of that home field advantage than in Texas anyways. And the only advantage now that I see for Texas is Cole Hamels against Stroman, who was really good down the stretch in the regular season, though. Now in the postseason, in a must-win game, must-have game for your home crowd, in front of your home crowd. Can he get it done? That's my worry for the Jays. But when he's on, he has lights-out stuff and maybe even better overall stuff than David Price. And that's the thing that could be at the same time favoring the Jays. Maybe he even has better stuff than Cole Hamels, but you got to favor Cole Hamels in that matchup. But because it's in Toronto, I still say Toronto gets it done. And their bats came alive, remember, in Game 4 to force that Game 5 as well. Doc.
What's been your assessment of Prince Fielder? I know the Tigers fans here who download this podcast have a really sour taste in their mouth because the last time that Prince Fielder was in the postseason was with the Tigers, and that's when he launched into his whole, hey man, I'm just going home. Hey, the fans don't understand. Hey, I got kids to feed. And his performance lacked based on the contract and led to the quick exodus out of here. But I think he's done solidly, but,
Not in the postseason, though, Doc, because looking at it right now, and I knew he wasn't doing great. 125 average, 301 OPS, on base plus slugging. He's a slugging guy. He has to, slug 450 or above really to be an above average performer and be worth all that money that he's being paid by Tejas now. So for me, he's not getting it done once again in the postseason. And it's been a matter of time for this to happen, I think, for him in Texas, where he disappoints the fan base. And he already did in the first season, getting hurt, missing all that time in his first season in Texas. And then this year, though, really coming to form, hitting for more power, hitting for average once again like he did in 2013 with the Tigers. And for me, though, Fielder not cutting the mustard seed. And maybe he's just not a playoff performer. Maybe this is a sign of what is to come for the Rangers if they make it again next year, if they even advance in this year's postseason to the second round. It might just be where he's not good enough to deal with the pressure. And when that's the case, you're not going to get it done in the postseason very often. So I would say underperforming so far in the postseason. And
hey,
you know what?
He might be due for a breakout game.
He might be, though, but not exciting so far out of him.
Okay.
Even though he did well, I'll give him this much. He did well down the stretch for Texas. Until that last series, he wasn't as great in that last series. But before that last series, very good numbers and hitting for power once again for the Rangers. And with that, I think we can move on here to something else, to the other Game 5. And that is between the Astros and Royals. Astros going to KC at Kauffman Stadium for Game 5. Colin McHugh on the mound for the Astros. Surprisingly, I didn't even know this. Never even really brought him up in all our discussions about the Astros leading up to this podcast. But he won 19 games during the regular season for Houston. And then Cueto, underachieving really for the Royals up until this point. Even in the postseason, he allowed 4 runs, no decision in Game 2 for the Royals. McHugh, though, got it done. 2 earned runs, I believe, in Game 1 and won that game for the Astros. Now they face each other. Cueto, the big money arm. McHugh, this younger guy, really under the radar until now. I think, though, it really does favor the Astros still, because they still have that energy and not as much pressure on them to get it done as KC. And KC at home now, even more pressure to get it done, and more pressure for Johnny Cueto to get it done, and to prove that he's a bona fide ace, which I still don't believe he's a dominant ace.
Yeah, the key to the game, though, for Kansas City will be to get out to a couple-run lead, get it to the 5th and 6th inning, and get it to the bullpen. If Cueto can just give you 5 to 6 solid innings, then it does favor the Royals because their bullpen has been outstanding. And again, as evidenced by the fact in the 2 games that they won, the bullpen has been excellent. I like Kansas City in this game. I disagree with you. I think the run ends here. Houston has been quite the Cinderella-type team. They going out there to New York and proving us wrong, going out there and advancing. What an interesting performance by Keuchel on the road at New York. And now going into the series, they've played very well. They've been competitive, and this is what the playoffs is about. This is what I was looking forward to all year in terms of, the playoffs. And you got Houston, KC. I still have to favor KC. It's a home game, and I do believe that KC will deliver in a sort of a 4-2 type game in that range. And I think Kansas City will come out early, will take advantage, will look to score a couple runs early and get to that bullpen where they can shut down Houston. I don't know, but though this is kind of one of those series where you could get to the 9th inning, be up 3-1, and KC blows it. You never know.
Or Astros might blow it, as they did already in Game 4, remember, with Will Harris soft-throwing guys who allowed 4 singles, 3 earned runs, those 4 hits in the 8th inning. They blew it, had a 6-2 lead, and they let it up, and they lost 9-6 in Game 4. Disappointing for the Astros. Could have gotten it done and clinched a second-round berth in the postseason, which they haven't done since 2005. It's been that long for the Astros to gain victories and to gain a second-round appearance. So I still believe they have the momentum. And even though they allowed all those runs, blew that lead, they could still get it done because of McHugh. And I think McHugh has less pressure on him to get it done than Johnny Cueto and KC in front of his home crowd at Kauffman Stadium in Game 5. That's why I favor the Astros, but I could see the Royals winning too because, hey, Ryan Matson, if you get to the pen, Matson's been great, pitching in more high-leverage situations at the back end of games because of the closer Holland being out for the season now. And Herrera's been good enough. He's a dominant arm as well at the back end of games. Wade Davis, the most dominant relief pitcher, non-closer, you could say, in the game. And now you have him that can close games, Herrera that can close games. Both of those guys can be utilized in that situation in the 8th and the 9th inning. And Matson, as I said, in the 7th inning. So right now you have the best of both worlds. If Cueto gets it done, you do. If he pitches you 5 or 6 strong, that's all you need out of Cueto. But I still kind of doubt that. I don't think he's that dominant ace, and I think McHugh might be even more of a better pitcher, more ready for this moment. As much as that is surprising to a lot of people to say, I think he might just be more ready because there's less pressure as well on his arm to get it done here in Game 5. And he was a better all-around regular season performer as well for the Stros than Cueto was for the Royals once he got to KC after the deadline.
Now, just in terms of managers, how have you felt the managers have done in this series? I know the Kansas City manager takes a lot of grief. You know, people who are sabermetrically inclined will always say, Ned Yost makes decisions that aren't really statistically appropriate. He may get away with it. And then on the other side, you have, the Houston manager. Just in terms of I know blowing a game is really challenging to come back from, but I really feel like just in watching it that both managers have done a fairly decent job and have deserved their spot in the playoffs. I haven't seen anything too alarming in terms of the managers in this series.
Well, you know what, when you're Ned Yost in KC, you have Wade Davis in the 9th. Okay, he's really being used as that exclusive 9th inning guy. Even though Herrera can do it, you have Herrera as a closer type in the 8th inning, back-to-back, and Matson in the 7th. And now you're in a situation where you have Cueto in Game 5. He doesn't really have that much of a troublesome situation to deal with right now. And the offense is clicking right now. I mean, they came back, had that great performance. Who didn't get it done? Hosmer got it done. You had all these guys get it done. Salvador Perez. Casey can hit, can pitch good enough. That's why they're in this situation. I just see them coming up short, a little bit short against the Stros, and it's not going to be, I think, because of Ned Yost this time around. Even though maybe you could have said, going into this as I did, that he would have cost this team this series, it will not be because of him. It'll be because of the upstart Stros just being better and getting it done. As long as their bullpen holds up, though, and as long as their Game 4 disappointing performance, choking that lead away, doesn't affect them in Game 5, because sometimes that catches up to a team in that next game. Now, do you think it will in this game for the Stros after what they did blowing that huge lead? A 4-run lead that they had going into the 8th inning.
Yeah, it's tough to come back from, but if a team can do it, Houston can. They've been successful all year. Like I said, they had that slide on the road towards the end of the season, and yet they go on the road in the wild card game, pressure-packed situation, and handle their business in a one-game elimination-style situation. So I think that, in situations where you're not used to those type of situations, it's not just that easy. No matter what the situation is, even if you have a 4-run lead, it's not that easy. You've seen that once momentum gets going, it sometimes can snowball and games can get away from you. And sometimes when you have that inexperience, that's what happens. But the mark of a good manager is, does it happen again in Game 5? If it does, then maybe there was a lingering effect. But I do think the manager of Houston will do a good enough job, and make it a competitive game. But I need to see KC Toronto for the pennant, period.
Now, do the Stros need Dallas Keuchel, though, in Game 5 to get it done for the Stros? I don't think they do because of Colin McHugh. How about your take on that? Because he pitched in Game 3 very good, as he was in that wild card playoff game in the Bronx.
Ooh, now you're talking strategy. You're saying that
what do you think?
If Houston has a 1 or 2 run lead and you need to, you have to do
I was just saying,
if they have
even if it wasn't used...
inning, if he's in the 6th inning, 7th inning, they got a 1-run lead, do you want to bring him out there to maybe preserve the lead? Is that what you're saying, out of the bullpen?
Kind of, but also if he didn't have to go in Game 3, now he had to because he pitched in that wild card playoff game, but if he wasn't utilized in that game, now it won them that game and got them in the ALDS against the Royals. But if he wasn't utilized, let's say he was available for Game 5, that would enhance their chances. But would it guarantee their chances? And would that be their only way of getting it done? Or do you think they can get it done without Keuchel as a starting pitcher out there for Game 5? That's kind of my question for you.
It always depends on how the game unfolds.
Yeah.
If you feel like it's, KC stringing some hits together and you feel like the momentum is out of your hand, the crowd's going wild, and you feel like that's the guy in your gut that can kind of slow things down, you bring him out there. You have to unload. You can never, ever, ever plan. I know Osmus might say this. I was planning for Game 1 of the ALCS, and I didn't
Don't plan ahead, right? Just react as if it is the moment. Act in the present. Why can't you do that? Osmus never did that this year.
I unload the bullpen, and whoever can help me win. And Brett Osmus would be like, I did not feel the need to bring on Alex Wilson. I felt like we needed him for the Game 1 of ALCS.
Yeah, I'm saving him for Game 1 of the ALCS, even though we're in a must-win game right now.
Did you know you're going to be eliminated, Brad?
Yeah, an elimination game, but you're still going to save him. That'd be Brad Osmus. You're right.
I'm almost certain next year he's going to bust out with, "You've never managed, you don't know." you don't know what it's like to prepare. I prepare day in, day out. He's due for a meltdown. I mean, you kind of feel like he's been bottling it up.
Oh, all the emotion because of all the fans being on him, criticizing him all the time, and all the writers
He's been so professional.
him.
A better part of 2 years. A couple little snippets of irritability, like terse would be the way you would describe some of his press conferences.
He snapped a little bit, right, at times.
Light.
But he's had to react to so many comments and so much dismay from the fans. And much to the dismay of the fans, the fan base of the Tigers, he hasn't really overreacted and let out all his anger and frustration yet. And I think he has to do that to show himself as a good quality manager anyways for the Tigers. But that's a topic for another day. This is Game 5, huge playoff game for both squads.
Can't wait.
And you know what? I've got the Stros. You've got the Royals. And you know what? I like Carlos Correa as well, that young phenom shortstop for the Stros. 2 home runs in Game 4. The youngest guy in the American League ever to do it in a playoff game, Doc. The youngest guy ever to do it was Andrew Jones of the Atlanta Braves back in the day, when he was a rookie, I believe. And that was in the NL. That's why Correa has that accolade, that feat in the American League side of things. So that's Game 5 there. We already picked Game 5 in the other series as well, Rangers-Jays. And for that series, once again, looking back at it really quick, the Jays bats. It's about those bats, and they're perking up at the right time, Doc.
Exactly.
Look at these guys hitting. Donaldson right now. You have Joey Bats, who went off a little bit earlier in the series. He has to get his act, going or act together again here. But you got Donaldson who can hit. He's showing form right now. You got Bautista who can, I think, get back to form here. And Encarnacion who hit, specifically in Game 4 here, doing what he did, driving in a run. Donaldson driving in 2. And Revere hitting for average really all series long. So all those guys, if they hit again in Game 5, that's another reason why the Jays can get this done, even with a youngster and Stroman on the mound, Doc.
Yeah, all credit to Toronto. That's the model you would use in terms of what they call going all in. You get the marquee pitcher, you bring in guys. I mean, they made a lot of moves this year to kind of really revamp that team, and it looks like, by all accounts, when you look at kind of how the money situation might work out there in Toronto, that it's going to be a one-year type situation. They're going to be competitive for years to come, but I don't think they're going to sustain all of this talent that they have right now. David Price likely to be gone, and he's really, I mean, if you imagine next year, if you want to foreshadow a little bit, David Price with the Cubs, oh my God, you can almost start to predict and make them the favorite next year. If he signs with them, with that young talent and the offensive power that they've been showing and the ability to kind of mash and the way they've gelled, look out, because he's going to be reunited with his former manager from Tampa Bay. But if this doesn't work out for Toronto, I think it's going to be one of those more devastating exits, because when you say they went all in, they gave up a lot.
All the poker chips were put in, right?
They went for it, and so far so good. Let's see how it shakes out.
The gambles paid off so well, and now it's about those bats getting it done here in this Game 5. Crucial, must-win Game 5 in Toronto. And it's Bautista stepping up, Encarnacion stepping up. Tulowitzki, who's hit 1-18 in this series, has to step up as well. He was 0 for 4 in Game 4. He can't be 0 for 4 in Game 5 again. And they're lucky, though, Kevin Pillar, who gets it done in the outfield, can cover all that ground out there. He's hit this series, hitting .412, had 3 hits, in Game 4. If he continues to hit, and if they get more production out of Tulowitzki, out of Bautista, and something out of Encarnacion maybe as well, they're going to win this Game 5. And I forget about all those ifs. I think they're going to get it done because of the strength of Stroman as well and that home crowd in Toronto at Rogers Center. So there we go with our Game 5 predictions. And we have coming up in a little bit here the book author of the 50 greatest players in Detroit Tigers history. And that is Mr. Robert W. Cohen. And then later in the podcast, Ryan Ford of the Free Press to discuss his Houston Astros, what's going to happen in Game 5, and also the Seattle Mariners. How about that new GM there in Seattle, Jerry Dipoto, the former GM of the LA Angels of Anaheim, now just the LA Angels. How about him? Will he be successful there in Seattle as well? An analytical mind, perspective to bring into that front office of the Seattle Mariners. We'll see the moves that he will conduct in his first offseason as GM there in Seattle. So we'll get his take on those moves. What are some of those moves that he could see happening for Seattle this offseason? And with that, we'll take a quick commercial break here on Tiger Talk with Chirco and Company.
Doc here for FanaticU.com, Detroit Sports official outfitter and the official outfitter of the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Go visit FanaticU.com, and if you're a fan of the Pistons, Lions, Tigers, Wings, go visit FanaticU.com and rock out in great Detroit sports gear. And if you're into saving money, use the promo code DSP, and anything at all that you want to purchase, anything, even items that are on clearance, you will save 15% at checkout when you use the promo code DSP. You got the big Michigan State matchup. Represent your favorite college team and go visit FanaticU.com. Great selection, always adding new items, and now that the Red Wings are on fire, look for great Dylan Larkin gear. Visit fanaticu.com, and at checkout, don't forget, promo code DSP, and save 15% off your entire order. Detroit Sports official outfitter, fanaticu.com.
And now joining me on Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company is our guest, book author Robert Cohen of the book, The 50 Greatest Players in Detroit Tigers History. Robert, thanks for joining me today on the podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So first off, Robert, what was the process behind researching for this book and writing this book?
Well, the rankings are essentially based on the level of dominance that each player attained during his time in Detroit. I should probably preface it by saying that I only viewed each player during their years as a Tiger. So there were some, like a Hall of Fame players such as Goose Goslin, only spent about 3 seasons with the Tigers. He made the list, but he probably placed further down in the rankings than one might expect. Another one was Rocky Colavito, who had a couple of great years for the Tigers, but spent most of his years with the Cleveland Indians. So basically, I tried to look at the level of dominance that each player attained during his time with the Tigers, and to do that, I looked at things such as the number of All-Star appearances a player made, how many times he might have led the league in a major statistical category, how he fared in the annual MVP and or Cy Young voting, and then, of course, I also had a look at the level of statistical compilation that he achieved during his time with the Tigers. So where does a player rank on the all-time lists for home runs, RBIs, batting average, and things of that nature for the hitters, and then for the pitchers, ERA, wins, complete games, saves, things like that.
So, Robert, you ranked Ty Cobb as the greatest player in Tigers franchise history, and there's no debating that. But through your extensive research for this book, did you find reason to believe that Cobb, known as the Georgia Peach, should be considered the greatest player in Major League Baseball history?
Well, if you talk to the old-timers, they'll tell you that he was. The interesting thing is that when they selected, I believe it was in 1969 for the centennial of baseball, I believe Ty Cobb was ranked as the greatest baseball player in history of the game. Then years later, he took a backseat to Babe Ruth and also Willie Mays in most people's minds. And I think that just because that's the way the game has come to be viewed in the last 50 years. Back then, baseball was considered to be more of a science, and that's what Cobb specialized in: bunting, line drive hits, and he had some power, but basically he was more of a line drive hitter. Had a tremendous batting average, highest batting average in Major League history, and he stole a lot of bases. But since then, the game has become more of a power game. So I personally feel that he's one of the 2 or 3 greatest players of all time, but I wouldn't quite put him at number 1 just because of the overall dominance that Babe Ruth had during his career.
So you ranked Hall of Famers and 1935 World Series champions, hammering Hank Greenberg and Charlie Gehringer ahead of fellow Hall of Famer and Mr. Tiger himself, Al Kaline. How hard was it to do so, knowing all the years he spent in the Motor City, 22 in total, and his numerous contributions to the organization over those 2+ decades, which included a terrific performance in the 1968 World Series against the St. Louis Cardinals, in which he batted .379, hit 2 home runs, and drove in 8.
Oh, there's no question that Al Kaline was a great player, especially in that he excelled in all facets of the game. He was an exceptional base runner, even though he didn't steal a lot of bases. He was a great outfielder, probably the greatest defensive outfielder in Tigers history, and a very good hitter. It's just that when you look at those categories I was discussing before, the level of dominance, I mean, he never won a Most Valuable Player award, and Hank Greenberg won 2, and Gehringer won 1. Gehringer is generally considered to be one of the 3 or 4 greatest second basemen in baseball history, and Greenberg had his career cut short by military service during World War II. He would have done even more had he not spent some of his peak years in the military. So while I acknowledge certainly that Kaline was a great player, I just felt he came up a bit short when comparing him to Greenberg and Gehringer.
So Greenberg, a great legendary Tigers first baseman, Miguel Cabrera, another one, and a current player, and the highest ranked current player on the list of your 50 greatest Tigers of all time at number 7. So after winning his 4th batting title in 5 seasons this past year, and after capturing back-to-back MVPs in 2012 and 2013, what does he need to do to rise up your rankings and surpass Greenberg as the greatest Tigers first baseman of all time?
Oh, I think if he has another 2 or 3 really good, outstanding years like that, he may do that. I had him ranked as number 7, I believe. I think by now he may have already passed 6 and 5. He just has to It's going to be tough to get into that Elite Four, though, of Cobb, Greenberg, Gehringer, and the K-line. But if he has a few more great years like that, he'll probably be able to crack the top four eventually.
And speaking of current Tigers, Robert, Justin Verlander is the ace of the present Tigers pitching staff, and rightfully so after he regained ace form in the second half of the season. You have him ranked number 8 in your rankings currently, and one spot ahead of the man who I think is the best pitcher in franchise history, Prince Hal Newhouser, who has the most wins above replacement all-time among Tigers pitchers. But with all that said, is JV ranked ahead of Newhouser because of the fact that he won that MVP and Cy Young Award in 2011, and specifically the MVP award?
Not so much that. It's more that as great as Newhouser was, he had two of his greatest seasons during World War II, and most of the greatest players in the game were in the service. So even though he had a phenomenal year again in 1946 after the players returned, you have to include in the equation the fact that he did have his 2 MVP seasons while most of the best players in the game were in the military. So that factored into the equation. If not for that, I would have put him ahead of Verlander.
And then looking at the postseason success, Newhouser, wasn't horrible in the 45 World Series and really has been overall in his career was better than JV has been in the postseason, as Newhouser hurled a complete game victory in Game 7, as I bet you know, to win the series over the Cubbies. So in saying all that, I bet it's a close battle between those two, right? Between JV and Newhouser, as you already were getting at.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It was a tough call between those two. As I mentioned, the only reason I put Verlander ahead was because Newhouser had 2 of his greatest years during World War II, plus Verlander's pitching in a different era with, the steroid era, and although the last few years steroids haven't been as much of a factor, but he did have some his greatest seasons during a hitter's era.
And now looking at career awards, did you ever look at the career win above replacement marks of any of these players? Did that come into play when ranking them at all?
No, to be honest with you, even though I believe that all those the sabermetric numbers have a place in the game, I believe I've been following the game for about almost 50 years now, so I've seen not every player there obviously, but I've seen all the players in the last 50 years perform, and I prefer to go by the eye test. I observe what I see a player's strengths and weaknesses to be, and I go by that as much as anything. And I do believe that there is definitely a place for the old numbers too. I mean, I don't think you can totally ignore runs batted in and runs scored, even though they are, to a certain extent, team-oriented numbers. I think they do have a place in the game. Obviously, on-base percentage and slugging percentages are very important numbers as well, but I don't really pay too much attention to some of the other numbers, such as wins above replacement. I think you can get too bogged down in numbers at times. I prefer not to do that.
And now let's talk about Jack Morris now and your ranking of him at number 10. What catapulted him to the 10th spot in your rankings? And how close would you say is the gap between him and Mickey Lolich for the 3rd greatest starter in franchise history?
That was fairly close. I think the thing that separated Morris is that he won more games during the 1980s than any other pitcher, and I think that proved to be a huge factor. Lolich had about 3 or 4 exceptional years, but Morris was better for a longer period of time. So I think that's what gave him the nod over Lolich.
And before you did your research, Robert, on all these players who cracked your top 50 rankings, did you truly think that you would place Bobby Higginson and Tony Clark, both of whom played on some of the worst Tigers clubs in franchise history, and they did so together from 95 until 2001, as high in your rankings at number 29 and 32 respectively, as you did?
Well, I mentioned during the introduction that when I formulated my rankings, I tried not to look at the level of success that the team experienced during a player's time. I mean, obviously that played into that was a factor, but if a player has had some great years, I tried to, or not that Higginson or Clark had any really great years, but they were very, very good players for several years. And I tried to overlook the fact that they played on some bad teams, because you can't really hold that against them, since baseball is largely an individualistic game.
Yeah, so really, in the grand scheme of things, you were looking at the individual performances and of these guys while donning the Old English D.
Yeah, I mean, if it was a close call between 2 players, I might have factored into the equation the level of success the team experienced during their time with the club. But overall, I tried to look at the individual contributions of a player to the team.
So really quick now, before I let you go, who's the one player you studied who went unheralded in his career with the Tigers and deserves more attention today for his contributions to the organization? And then, contrary to that, who's the one player who donned the Old English D who you now view as overrated by pundits and fans?
Well, I think one player who time has pretty much forgotten is Bobby Veach, who played in the same outfield as Ty Cobb and Sam Crawford during the teens and even into the early 1920s. He was one of the American League's best RBI men, yet he's become largely overlooked because of the fact that he played alongside Cobb and Crawford, and later on Harry Howman as well. Howman is another player who, even though I think most true Tiger fans have heard of him, I don't think they realize how great a hitter he was. I mean, he won 4 American League batting titles during the 1920s and batted over 400 one year. As far as most overrated, well, I think even though I have him ranked fairly high, I think Willie Horton is somewhat overrated just based on his ability. I think one of the reasons why he's become such an icon through the years with the Tiger organization is the off-the-field contributions he made to the team as far in one of the most difficult periods in American history with the race riots in the Motown City during the late 1960s. He played a huge factor in calming things down. So I think I rated him a little bit higher than maybe his ability would indicate based on his overall contributions to the team as a whole.
And with that being said, Robert Cohen of this great new book, which is called The 50 Greatest Players in Detroit Tigers History. Thank you for all your time on the podcast, and have a great day. And you know what? Where can we find you? How can we follow you on Twitter and maybe on other social media outlets, Robert?
Well, I have a page on Facebook. It would be Robert W. Cohen, and you can also do an author search on Amazon. I have an author page there. Just do a search on my name, Robert W. Cohen, and you can look at all my other books that I've written as well. The Tiger book is actually one of a series of 50 greatest books that I've written. I've done a few on some of the other more iconic sports teams, such as the Yankees, Red Sox, New England Patriots, and New York Football Giants, and St. Louis Cardinals. So I have a whole collection of books there that you might be interested in, and you can find that on my author page on Amazon. Robert, just do an author search on my name, Robert W. Cohen.
And once again, The 50 Greatest Players in Detroit Tigers History by Robert W. Cohen. Robert, thank you very much for all your time today on the 12th episode of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
Yep. And welcome back here to the 12th episode of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. Had a visitor to the studio today here, Doc, who called me out for parking in the wrong parking spot outside.
That was a classic. To give you a little insight here, we're in Sterling Heights, and Vito's just wrapped up the interview with Robert Cohen. That was very insightful, interesting how he's also ranked other great players across Major League Baseball. And go pick up his book through our Amazon banner. We'll definitely throw up links at DetroitSportsPodcast.com. You click through the Amazon banner, you buy his book, you support Robert, support those authors who are showing some love to our Detroit teams, and also show the network some love. But yeah, we're doing the podcast. All of a sudden, we get a little knock on the door, and it's a little bit unannounced. It's one of those rare times where I left the door unlocked, feeling comfortable, and all of a sudden someone comes in and is like, hello, by chance, does someone have the cruise? Can you please not park it in front of our business? And Vito's like, what? Vito, how dare you? The studio, we have basically, if you come into the studio, I have the suite pretty much all to myself. So Vito, there's literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 parking spots closer to the studio, yet you park so far away. What's up with that?
Well, you know what? I like the walk, the exercise. I'm getting my cardio in this morning, okay? So I got to get the legs moving, the blood flowing. That was my reasoning, okay? That's my reasoning behind that maneuver of my own this morning. And, hey, it didn't work out, but now we know, huh?
She's like,
made an honest mistake.
Yeah, and she was like, please, it's okay. We want to use those spots for our elderly clients. So, Vito, come on. You know that potentially for the last 3-4 weeks since you've been recording this podcast, you have been forcing the older residents of Sterling Heights.
I've been forcing them to walk a longer distance than they should. I'm a bad resident now over here inside the studio doing this podcast.
So the host of the Tigers Talk podcast doesn't like the elderly. What are you going to do?
I'm the culprit now for that, huh? That'll be my the lasting phrase said about me when this podcast is over, that I don't like the elderly. After all the additions of the podcast, it'll be that's remembered about me after all that. But anyways, I'll deal with it. It's fine. I can always take the punches too. And now you move on. You live and learn, Doc. And as we lived and learned during that interview with Robert Cohen, talking about JV, Newhouser, who should be ranked ahead of one another. He said Verlander ahead of Newhouser, and not just because he won the Cy Young and the MVP in the same season, but because Newhouser, who won those 2 MVPs as well, which
kind of downplayed a little bit because
Well,
I was going to say he downplayed it because of the fact that he pitched in an era when maybe some guys were gone and serving in the military.
Because he achieved a lot of success himself, and I thought those accolades that he racked up in the postseason 2 and the 45 World Series winning Game 7, Verlander, we would just hope could pitch 6 or 7 in a Game 7 at this point because he's been so miserable, not in the postseason as a whole, but in the World Series specifically, in 2 of the Fall Classics now that he's pitched in. 2012 and 06. The first one was 06, obviously, against the Cardinals. 2012 against the Giants. In Game 1, he got bombed in San Fran. Remember that? How miserable that was to watch as a Tigers fan. Pablo Sandoval went off. How many hits did he have? How many home runs? I think 2 or 3, maybe 3 home runs in Game 1 of a World Series against your best starting pitcher. So he was nothing close to dominant. He was very much a junior varsity pitcher. He didn't bring his varsity stuff, as Rod Allen loves to say about JV. He didn't have that varsity stuff for Game 1 of the 2012 World Series against the Giants. And Newhouser got it done a little bit more during his time, but as you said, he downplayed it because it was more of a pitcher's league, back then. It really was. Now I guess you can succeed as a hitter a lot more now. So I guess it was easier to pitch back then, is what he was saying. Which, I think if you're succeeding, you're still a good pitcher. But that's his take. That was my take about JV, about Hal Newhouser. And Prince Hal Newhouser, as I brought up during that segment. And with that, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll get Ryan Ford on the line here from the Detroit Free Press to discuss the Seattle Mariners, their hiring of Jerry DiPoto, the former Halos GM, who kind of lost out there in that relationship with Mike Scioscia. He left on his own terms, though, there in L.A. And then also we'll talk about the Stros, his Houston Astros, succeeding but falling in Game 4, now going into a Game 5 situation. Can they pull it off? And their first playoff series since 2005, the 2005 World Series against the Chicago White Sox. We'll be right back after this break. And to discuss now Game 5 of the ALDS between the Houston Astros and the Kansas City Royals is Ryan Ford of the Detroit Free Press. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent.
Trying to hang in there, and I know you have a lot to say about your Houston Astros, I bet, Ryan.
Oh, yeah. Well, very excited. I mean, on one hand, I'm sort of going into the game with just treating it, this whole season has been basically playing with house money. No one really expected this from the Astros. I mean, there were signs they were getting better last year, but a playoff, I was mostly just hoping for a winning season. I wasn't planning on playoffs at all, especially considering, I mean, the Mariners were actually picked to win the West, and they flamed out. But, I mean, the West looked very deep going in, and the Astros looked to be just a class behind. But, they've gotten this far, and, it's funny they're playing the Royals, who everyone keeps comparing the Astros this year to the Royals last year. And I can see the similarities, but it's just it's a tough matchup,
Well, yeah, you got the team that was on the rise last year, surprised everybody as a wild card winner, and this year's wild card winner in your Stros. Going head-to-head here in Game 5, McHugh and Cueto on the mound. I'm kind of liking McHugh and what he's done in the postseason, what he's done in the regular season. And to the surprise of me, he won 19 games during the regular season, Ryan. I did not know that.
Well, he did it very quietly. I mean, he actually had something of a setback early in the year. In the first half, he had about a 4.5 ERA after an excellent rookie season last year. And he was sort of a reclamation project by the Astros, who kind of stole him off waivers from the Rockies, and basically they saw something they liked in him, and they sort of worked with him. He works quickly, works down and away in the zone. He doesn't have a great fastball, but he's got a good changeup, and he works down a lot, and you can have a lot of success when you're working down and away hitters. And really in the second half, that started to come through. He dropped his ERA to just over 3 in the second half, and I mean, you saw it in Game 1 against the Royals. Pretty much handled that entire lineup, other than, he gave up 4 hits. 2 of them were home runs to Kendrys Morales. Those are the only 2 runs he gave up the entire game. So I think if he can do that again, obviously, the Astros will take 6 innings of 2-run ball from him, put him in a position to win.
So then are you in a comfortable mindset having this guy on the mound in Game 5 going against Johnny Cueto, this bound-to-be high-paid starting pitcher in the offseason who was the prize trade deadline acquisition for the KC Royals?
I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, there's always a chance. I mean, Johnny Cueto is a great pitcher. He's come through time and time again, and he'll be pitching at home. Well, his temporary home, I suppose. It's not Cincinnati, and it's not wherever he'll sign in the offseason. But, he just hasn't looked right, other than one great game against the Tigers, really. It was in late August, but other than that, he just has not looked right for the Royals. And so, I mean, you never like to say this guy is going to be terrible because it's one game and everyone can be great for one game, but I like the matchup. Sadly, we can't put Dallas Keuchel back out there for another game. Colin McHugh is probably the guy I'd go with. He's been the most consistent pitcher over the last 2 years behind Keuchel.
So now he's a guy that you have going. And in the game prior to this, in a winnable game for the Stros, as you know, it just slipped away from the Stros, and because of the bullpen, realistically, and the lack of a truly reliable flame-throwing arm, maybe you could say, at the back end of their bullpen, that they've been lacking all season long, Ryan. And it finally reared its ugly head, I believe, to the fullest degree last night. So Monday night in Game 4, when they could have clinched their berth to the second round for the first time since 2005. They would have loved it as a franchise. Would have been huge for them. Would have been huge for you, Ryan. And they couldn't muster enough of a bullpen to get it done. Enough of that run prevention from the bullpen, and Will Harris specifically, and then Tony Sipp after that. So does it fall on the Stros not having that truly reliable flame-throwing back end of the pen arm, Ryan?
Possibly. I mean, I think on one hand, the bullpen they built is the bullpen they have, and honestly, the bullpen has gotten great results. It was one of the American League's best all season long. And yes, there isn't one name out there that makes batters shaking their boots, but Will Harris, Tony Sipp, they've been incredibly effective, especially when, Tony Sipp, great against lefties. The Astros, just to be sure, added Oliver Perez in August to, for that added punch against lefties. And you saw that the bullpen has been equal parts great and terrible in this series. We'll always remember Game 4's collapse, but at the same time, Perez came in, was dominant in relief. In Game 1, Tony Sipp and Will Harris were dominant in relief in the wild card game. And Luke Gregerson, he was sort of their big signing, and a guy that I think a lot of teams went after. He's not necessarily a flamethrower in the traditional sense, but he's a highly effective guy who closed out a lot of games. You can also argue that the Astros bullpen is maybe getting a little tired. They have about 5 different pitchers who threw in 60 games, which is quite a bit. But then again, A.J. Hinch likes to mix and match according to the matchup. And it's worked out well. It's a thing where Astros fans became very used to the phrase trust the process, basically trying to, rebuilding by the numbers. And one of the things they did is they went out and got underutilized guys for the bullpen very cheaply, and hope enough of them will work out. And I think they did. And I don't think the bullpen will be as bad as it was. A lot had to go wrong. Nothing else. The Royals getting 6 straight hits, and then things fell apart. And even then, they probably could have gotten out of that game if the ground ball doesn't go off Sipp's glove and take a funny spin and take a bad bounce in front of Correa, who looked like he was going to make the double play. And they would have gotten out of the inning with a 6-4 lead. One ball, and it all fell apart.
But Ryan, with all that being said by you, is the onus on Houston's front office now to address the flame-throwing shortage in the club's pen in the offseason?
I could absolutely see that. It's a thing where, as I said, no one was expecting Astros to be here, and so they spent money. They actually brought in Harris off waivers. They signed Pat Neshek and Gregerson in the offseason to decent free agent deals. Neshek is worn down. He's lost a little bit of effectiveness. Wasn't used a lot toward the end of the year. And I think now that they're established as contenders, they could absolutely go out and spend money on a big-name closer, especially since a lot of their other possible needs are going to be filled by kids coming up. They've got the lineup mostly in place. They've got, in addition to having control of Keuchel and McHugh for several more years, they've got Lance McCullers, who's been fantastic, and they have a former number 1 pick, Mark Apple, who struggled a bit early on. He's going to come up into the rotation hopefully next year, the year after, so they absolutely could go after a closer, but it's also a team devoted to analytics, and sometimes throwing a ton of money at bullpen doesn't always work. I think Dave Dombrowski and the Tigers have taught us that a little bit.
Yeah, I would say Dave D knows something about that, maybe throwing some money at some guys that they shouldn't have, and maybe not throwing enough money at some other guys that they should have. So with that being said, you brought up young players and so many young studs for the Stros coming up that are also already on the team, such as their phenom shortstop, Carlos Correa, who went yard twice in Game 4 after being plunked in the elbow by Royal starter Yordano Ventura in the first inning. In doing so, he became the youngest player in American League history with a multi-homer postseason game at 21 years and 20 days old. He's only a year younger than me, Ryan, and he's doing all this already in the postseason. It's unimaginable to me. I could not deal with any of the pressure. But that's a topic for another day, because I want to ask you now, Ryan, how high is the ceiling truly for Correa? And is he the pre-steroid using and abusing Alex Rodriguez of this generation of great young ball players.
Obviously you heard the quote of Alex Rodriguez anointing him as the game's next great shortstop, and he certainly seems that way. He's got all the physical tools. He was the Astros' #1 pick. He was a well-regarded hitter coming out of school, and he seems to have all the skills, all the tools, and from everything I hear, he also seems to be a great kid. He fit in instantly in the clubhouse. I've never heard a negative word about him, and I have to say I'm rather looking forward to another 15 years, hopefully, of seeing him in an Astros uniform at the bare minimum. But,
yeah, if he doesn't leave for somebody else, right, in the offseason for a big free agent deal, because you never know what these guys nowadays, not a ton of loyalty to any ball club.
Well, I don't view it as loyalty. I understand. I can't hold it against a player for changing teams when I've changed jobs and changed employers several times, occasionally in search of a better situation, a better paycheck. That doesn't worry me. I think one good thing is that the Astros are moving. The Astros are in, I believe, the 4th largest market in baseball. I know they're at least in the top 6. And so, with a good team comes increased revenues. Increased revenues means more ability to re-sign your own players. Baseball has a fantastic new TV contract giving money to all the teams. And honestly, the Astros have been skimping for a little bit. They have just over a $70 million payroll. They can afford to increase some things. That said, they've got Correa on, not a cheap deal. He signed a fairly high entry-level deal. So he'll be getting paid very well for a 21 and 22-year-old over the next few years. But I have to think that they'll make it good as things go along and rework contracts.
So Ryan McHugh or Cueto in Game 5? Who do you got and why?
I got McHugh. I think he's going to be solid and work down and away and take advantage of a lot of the Royals hitters' bad tendencies to try and make contact. I think he's going to get a lot of ground balls, and I think Cueto's just going to leave a couple up early in the zone, and I think we're going to see a couple of long flies from the Astros. I also think the bullpen's going to bounce back in a big way and finish out the game, and we'll see some in the ALCS.
I have the Stros too, by the way. If that makes you feel good or makes you feel more comfortable about picking the Stros. So you got it from me as well, picking the Stros. And, you brought up earlier really quick in the podcast about Cueto leaving KC more than likely. And I agree with you on that sentiment. So I want to see what you have to say about now the new Seattle Mariners GM, Jerry Dipoto, maybe going after Cueto in the offseason. And some other offseason moves that you could see happening for Dipoto in his first full offseason as the GM of the M's.
I think he could absolutely go after Cueto. I know one of the things he talked about when he was first hired was definitely he wants to address the team's position players and specifically get more athletic, I believe was his term, which makes sense. Safeco Field is a very large park, and so you need excellent outfielders to control it. And that's one thing the Mariners have not always had recently. They've been throwing a lot of money at free agents. They signed Nelly Cruz to a big deal. They signed Robinson Cano to a big deal the offseason before that. And Cano's a great second baseman. Nelly Cruz is a designated hitter in in pretty much all ways. And I think if he goes after quality defensive outfielders, that will help the pitching staff a lot. I know the Mariners also have a big name free agent, I don't know, maybe an under the radar big name free agent hitting the market in Hisashi Iwakuma, who has been their solid number 2 starter behind Felix for pretty much the last 3-4 years. And I think they'd like to re-sign him. He'd like to sign there again. He's from Japan. He feels very comfortable in Seattle in team's culture. So I would think Dipoto would go hard after him to begin with and then start addressing some position players. They could go after Cueto, but they also have Taijuan Walker, who the club expects big things out of. He's at times looked brilliant and at times struggled this season. They have James Paxton, who the hope is always there. He always kind of seems to get hurt and miss about 6 weeks at a time with various injuries, but still under club control and a very solid lefty. And then they have Danny Holtzen, who was the one-time top prospect in the entire organization and just cannot stay healthy in the minors. And he's out of options going into this year. So this spring they'll be looking to give him a shot to at least win a job somehow. So, they run out of rotation spot. They could go out for Cueto, I suppose. As a native Northwesterner, I would not mind that. And I think at some point the franchise is looking to make a statement that they are in it to win it. Been a complaint about Mariners ownership for quite a few years. They're just happy to enjoy the beautiful park and the beautiful seasonal summer weather and get 25, 30,000 fans out to the game and never actually try to put a winning product on the field. The team president actually announced that he'd be taking a severe pay cut to prove that it wasn't about the money, it's about winning, which is an interesting approach, I suppose.
So now it is all about winning, producing a winning ball club. And you know what, Ryan? You're a winner, too. Another great segment here on Tigers Talk with Chirco and Co. You have a good one, and I'll talk to you again soon. And, hey, good luck to your Houston Astros in Game 5.
Hey, thank you very much. Talk to you soon.
All righty, Ryan. Thank you very much for all your time today on Tigers Talk with Chirco and Co. And with that, hey, John, let's look at now the NL side of things in the playoffs, huh? And what has really stood out to you, by the way, so far? I think for me, last night, now Monday night, Mets, Dodgers. Mets killed it. Cespedes really came on, huh? Granderson got it done as well. The Grandy man can, and he did.
Yeah, I think they've responded well to a little bit of the controversy earlier in the series. You know, one of those situations where, what was your take on that slide? Was it a dirty play, or was it a good, solid slide? Because, you know, when you have a play that results in a significant injury, then you kind of look at, well, hey, you know, I'm glad no one was throwing at each other yesterday. It was good. It was good, clean baseball.
And it should be. It's a playoff game anyways. Come on, you have a lot more on the line. And
right.
Would Ruben Tejada really want that to happen anyways? I don't think he would want that to happen if it affects his team from winning, prevents his team from winning. For me, that was a little bit dirty, but for all the Mets fans, the faithful and Queens, they're going to think it's dirty and call it dirty. And it looked bad, though. It made it seem even more dirty to me. When I saw Tejada go out there yesterday before the game, they introduced him, and he had a cane. Had to use a cane. That made me feel bad for him. And that would I would hope make Chase Utley feel bad as well. And he's still a human being. He's a ball player, though, playing his job, doing his thing out there, sliding into second, and going in hard. Okay, cleats first and whatnot. But with no intent to hurt the player. He didn't want to hurt Tejada. I don't think Chase Utley is a dirty player in that regard. But the slide may be a little bit dirty because he did slide off the bag to prevent the double play from happening. So had to go really out of his way to kind of hit, make contact with Tejada there. So for me, a little bit dirty, but it's been blown out of proportion to a certain extent because he's just a ball player doing his job in the grand scheme of things, in my opinion, Doc.
So in your opinion, that slide was okay, just maybe okay. Bad luck for Tejada?
Bad luck for Tejada. And it looked bad now, and it even looks more dirty, like I said, because Tejada has to use a cane to walk around for the time being. But it's not like he's permanently in that condition, okay? It's not going to be that bad of a thing. So Utley has to get over it, and I hope he feels bad, though, for what he did still at the same
It's like one of those things where you don't like it to happen to your team, but as an outsider looking in, you can say, well, that's kind of what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to prevent the play.
Bring up the double play. And I don't think he had any intent to hurt Tejada. If you don't have any intent, which we don't know, okay, to sum it up, we don't know. We don't know what's going on inside his head. But he's in a playoff game trying to win a ball game, right, for his team. And doing so, he prevented a double player, try to prevent a DP from happening. So he was doing his job as a guy sliding into second base. So for me, he's a ball player conducting his everyday duty as a ball player. So for me, that's why I don't find it that extremely dirty, Doc.
Yeah, Vito, potentially this year could have one of the best ALCS, NLCS matchups of all time. If it goes down and it's Mets Cubs, and you got Kansas City and Toronto, oh my gosh.
You want Mets Cubs? How about
I want Mets Cubs.
Cards Dodgers or Cards Mets? I think Cards Mets still. I'm still holding on to that. But Wainwright does not look great out of the pen right now for the Cards. He did not look great against the Cubs Monday night. And the youngsters of the Cubbies are coming to form at the right time. Schwarber's killing it. He's their best hitter right now, even better than Rizzo. Chris Bryant hit that home run. Then Rizzo repeated back-to-back home runs there, I believe it
Massive.
was. Massive deep shots, right?
I was unbelievable. They had, what, that was like 7 home runs in that game?
At least 6.
Yeah.
You got Dexter Fowler as well, who killed it in that wild card playoff game. Now he's looking like he's coming to form once again. All these guys hitting at the right time, and Arrieta was just good enough. Wasn't pitch perfect, though. No pun intended. I'm not trying to talk about the movie here. But he wasn't extremely sharp, and he allowed 4 earned runs. Now, in his previous 13 starts combined, he had allowed 4 earned runs. That's something about Arrieta and his dominance leading up to that game Monday night against the Cardinals. But the Cards got to him a little bit. But the Cards bullpen, who's been good usually, has been in the past, and better than the Cubs, did not get it done. Faltered down the stretch, and it cost the Cardinals that game Monday night against the Cubbies. And I even saw a sighting of Austin Jackson. He was out there as a defensive replacement. So Ajax was being utilized. All these guys that they can pick from their bench, and they now have an extreme amount of depth with guys like Jackson. So they can hit it. Can they pitch it good enough? We'll see. But honestly, that might be the one thing that holds them back, their overall pitching staff. In their pen specifically, they have a lot of converted starting pitchers, reclamation projects in that pen. Trevor Cahill, who was great against the Cards Monday night. Other guys too, Clayton Richard, another good one. But can they keep getting it done going forward this postseason in this first round series? I think the Cards have a better shot to rebound from their bad bullpen performance. And that's why I still believe in the Cards getting it done in this series against their rival Cubbies.
Just for your entertaining value, just for something that you must see TV for us baseball fans, you'd want to see the Cards in the NLCS?
Cards for sure. And then I'll take either Mets or Dodgers. I think either team being in the NLCS wouldn't be a bad thing. And for the ratings, not at all. You got LA and then New York, or LA and the Cards. St. Louis is a big baseball market. So it'd be fine for the ratings. That purpose, definitely.
So which team in the NL do you feel like playing the best right now?
Mets, but then you look at even their great starting pitching hasn't been absolutely great. It was their bats that came to form. And then the Cards, their bullpen wasn't great. And then the Dodgers, Kershaw wasn't great. So I don't know. It's hard to pick between those three teams, and I'm not willing to do it.
So when we record this podcast next week, who will be in the ALCS? Who will be in the NLCS? Who do you think?
ALCS, Stros, and then Jays, NLCS, Cards, and Mets. But I could very well see Cards, Dodgers. I would like I said, either Cards, Dodgers, or Cards and Mets. And Cards, Mets, a rematch of the 06 NLCS it would be. And with that, Doc, we're going to shut down shop here today. Or close down shop, right? On Tigers Talk with Chirco and Co., the 12th episode. And next Wednesday will be the 13th episode. Lucky number 13, right? Wilt Chamberlain, we're number 13. We'll do that and talk to you about the NLCS and ALCS on that edition of the podcast next Wednesday.
Yep, want to thank the guest, Robert Cohen.
And then Ryan Ford, hey, another good segment from him. Always making good points and great insight about the Mariners. He broke it down for all the M's fans out there who listen into this podcast each and every single week. And hopefully we have a few non-Tigers fans that listen in. Mm-hmm. I would hope, Doc.
And this podcast will be marked by the great guests, great baseball talk, and Vito pissing off the residents here at the studio.
Pissing off the elderly, too, obviously, here on Tigers Talk. As I always do. I'm very good at it, I guess, Doc. And with that, that's all she wrote today for Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. Talk to you again next Wednesday for the 13th episode of the podcast.